Leadership. One of the most important aspects of leadership is communication. And one of the most important aspects of communication is storytelling. That's why I'm so excited to mention the Stories with Traction course with you. In this course, you will learn how to be a great storyteller. I share concepts with you on how you can boost sales, enhance your internal communication and marketing, and create a vibrant company culture. If you're looking to build a story bank for your organization and utilize a framework to persuade more effectively, go check out the course in the show notes, the Stories with Traction course. Now, on to the podcast. Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt Zaun. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. Traveling all around the country, I've heard a reoccurring theme time and time again, and that is leaders doing everything they possibly can to create a vibrant company culture. How do you create that kind of culture? That is going to be the main conversation, main topic of our conversation today, because today I'm excited to have Lori Halverson. Lori is the president of the Halverson Group, and she is a Vistage Chair where she helps business leaders build and live their legacy. Welcome to the show, Lori.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt.
And thank you for your time. I know you're extremely busy, so thank you so much for pouring into this conversation today. And I appreciate all that you do. So I'm excited to unpack this element of culture. I do see this as a reoccurring theme this year. I feel like last year there were some specifics leaders were focused on, and this year it is all about culture. And maybe that's because of what happened with COVID, where there's more of a hybrid work environment, where a lot of people realized culture was the cornerstone of what they were doing. And now it's a little bit been frayed due to that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you've experienced that as well, but I feel like culture has just dominated a lot of decisions when it comes to leaders.
Absolutely, Matt. I think even before COVID, culture was something that people talked about, but it definitely wasn't as prevalent as it has been since people moved at home, and now we have this hybrid work environment. And part of it is driven because people can't see one another. You don't have the same access to people. And I hear a lot from CEOs and the people that I coach, how do I maintain a company culture when half my staff is out and, I only see them a couple of days a week, because most people have the 3-2 now or 2-3, and they don't get that face-to-face time, both from a employee perspective, and then the managers and the leaders of the organization feel like it's more challenging.
So here's an idea based on what you said. I'm processing this. Is you had mentioned about the hybrid and not seeing one another. This could also be a huge opportunity for leaders to dive deeper into their strategy, their mission, their vision, their values, because okay, maybe they're not seeing people as much, but if the vision is so deep on what they're doing, the value that they're providing their clients, and almost not necessarily that it doesn't matter if they're seeing people, but it's just another way to reassess, regardless of the circumstance, whether it's in person, whether it's hybrid, or whether it is exclusively virtual. If everyone's on board doing what they need to be doing to provide that value, it could be a win. It could be almost a gift. Right?
It absolutely could. And I will tell you that I think whether you're remote or whether you're all in person, to me, it really comes down to just the fundamentals of culture in itself. So vision, having a good vision, getting people to buy into your why. For those people out there who know Simon Sinek, he talks a lot about why. If you don't know Simon, I'd recommend Googling him, because that's the first step in getting people to understand and hiring people who believe what you believe. in terms of that why and what you do and why you do it. The mission, the values are critical as well. To me, what's most important, because those are sort of foundational given things from a leadership, a culture perspective. But to me, what's most valuable is the sense of community and the sense of caring that people have. So when I think about culture and I think about leadership, the leadership piece is you've got to care about your employees. If you don't care about your employees, then the game's over. And I think in this day and age, with the different generations that are coming into the workforce, caring about your people and instilling a desire to know them and to grow them is really important. Go ahead.
Well, I appreciate you mentioning the fundamentals. Yeah. I don't want people to miss this. Often people kind of stiff arm that idea. Okay, yes, the fundamentals, but it's amazing that when it comes to really solid business leadership, the fundamentals are so unbelievably important. And I see this. Maybe this has become more prevalent just due to technology, but there's so many shiny things happening right now when it comes to being in the market that a lot of leaders are missing the fundamentals. And then they go back and they ask themselves, why is our culture eroding? Well, it's because they're not doing what you're saying, which is focusing on those fundamentals. So I appreciate you mentioning that.
Yeah, and I think the next step after that creating a community, which granted is harder when you're in a remote environment. I have a CEO in my Vistage group. He's 100% virtual all over the country. And they have a great culture because they invest in their people and they build a sense of community, which again is harder when you're remote, but it's absolutely not impossible. I mean, I led global teams and we had communities all across the world and within our own team that was completely remote. The key is it takes a little bit extra effort in order to meet with your people, to build that sense of community, get them on the phone if they're in person, or if they all live in the same geography, to get them together, to do fun things. And those sort of things are really important, I think, for building that community.
Well, let's highlight, you had mentioned you have a member that a lot of people are virtual and they've figured out a way to make the culture work. What's something that's being done right now to make that culture work, being 100% virtual?
Yeah, part of it is they still have team meetings. They still invest in their people. So I know a lot of companies found it more challenging during the pandemic and even after with remote people to say, how do I develop them? How do I invest in them? And continuing those practices to make sure people are developed is one way that you can create a good culture. But the managers talk to the employees. They don't have annual reviews where that's when the people get feedback. That's when the employees get feedback, but they're in constant communication with their staff. The other thing that they've done, which is really interesting and I think a bit unique, is they have a lower management to employee ratio because they want to make sure that the managers have time with their employees because they're remote. And so they have a 6-to-1 ratio, which in some businesses, I've seen 15-to-1. It depends. Wow. I know it depends on the business. I think that's one of the things that works for them to build the culture, and it allows them to build trust. So the following piece, and I work with all of my members and all the people I coach on this topic, is accountability. So when you think about culture, it's building that trust, caring about people, it's creating a community that people can get behind the why, get behind the your vision and your mission and values. But then it comes down to the behaviors. So what are the behaviors that exhibit your culture? And how do you hold people accountable to those behaviors? And those CEOs and it doesn't really matter the size of your business. It can be from a small business where you have 10 people, can be, a large business. And I think for the medium-sized companies that are out there, this is, I think it's when do you switch and really start talking about culture? And I say from day one, it doesn't matter the size, but talk about cultures, talk about the behaviors that you expect people to have, how you communicate with your staff, what that looks like, And then the hardest piece is the accountability. So how do you have, when people are off track, and not just in performance, because I think, that's where I see things a lot. Just, maybe their aptitude isn't good in the job, but it's all those other things. And how do you hold people accountable is probably one of the most common conversations that I have. And I think it's in medium-sized businesses, I think people struggle with that because, for a variety of reasons, but I think it's a hard topic in any regard.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioned the accountability piece. So one of the things that my mind goes to when you say that is just the difficulty with 5 generations being in the workplace. Because as you know, a lot of generations are different. So how do you, when you're coaching a CEO or you're coaching an executive that they may be dealing with a challenging team member and they're of a different generation, is there any guidelines you give them? Do you touch on that? What are your thoughts regarding that?
Mm-hmm. With regard to accountability and conversations, I don't believe that there's a difference. When you think about the work and how people work, the generations are hugely different. And I'll give you an example. In some of my offices around the world, where we had younger generations, they would be doing their work. They have their ear pods in. They're listening to music or whatnot, and they're still able to work. And different generations found that offensive or found that like, okay, so and so's not working because look, they're listening to music or whatnot. And I think that's where things show up with the multi-generation is just not understanding, different work ethics, different methods of working, different hours, people wanting more flexibility, being, they want to work at home now. I mean, the member that I talked about that's completely virtual, he's getting a lot of employees from companies who want people in the office, who don't want to be in the office. So I think that's where I see the generational. When it comes to accountability and having real conversations, not superficial conversations, not check the box conversations, but having real conversations about where people are doing well and what the gaps are in their performance or their behaviors, that's no different. In my mind, it's having trust and it's caring enough to give feedback. And one of my mantras has always been feedback is a gift. When given with positive intention, feedback is a gift. And if managers look at it like that they are helping the employee, it's really powerful. And it's when you have this positive intent, regardless of what the conversation is, whether development or helping people get to the standard behaviors that you're looking for, it's wonderful. I mean, it feels good for the manager and it absolutely feels good, for the employee.
I really appreciate you mentioned that, especially with how people work. Yes, major differences with generation, but that accountability piece, people are people, right? So as far as that sameness, it doesn't matter what generation, we do need to be held accountable to those behaviors that tie into the culture. So I appreciate you mentioning that. Just speaking about generations, there's this massive wave of millennials coming into leadership positions across the country. Are you excited about that? Do you see some challenges with that? What are some ideas that are coming up within some of the members that you're coaching regarding that?
Mm-hmm. Quite honestly, I'm excited. I mean, I'm excited for this new generation to come in. There's a lot of millennials that are already in leadership positions, and I think they bring a different energy, and they bring change, right? I mean, I think it's always good to have generations move up and they see the world differently. And this group of leaders who are rising through the ranks right now have seen a great deal in the world, right? They've experienced 9/11, they've experienced, all of these different things, and it's changed them and it's changed how they see the world. I think that there's a lot more social responsibility, so it can change the workplace in that regard, where people want to build something that's lasting. And that brings an entirely different mindset to the work that people do and the innovation and the focus. So I'm personally excited. I think there are some, few bumps in the road, and people, just because of where they've come from, it's really critical to invest in development for these next generation leaders because they do come from a technology world. There are a few areas where, everybody in a leadership position has things to learn. And I think just developing people and investing in people is going to keep your employees, but it's going to keep your culture alive, and it's going to bring you new innovations, and it's exciting.
Yeah, that social responsibility piece is key, right? Because at the top of every survey, when it comes to millennials, they're saying purpose and fulfillment. That really ties back to what you said regarding that social responsibility piece. Mm-hmm. So let's shift gears for a moment and just talk about the grit that it takes to lead, because the last few years have been unbelievable, right? I mean, it would make a incredible horror movie. I mean, we've had COVID, supply chain issues, inflation issues. I mean, it is almost nauseating for some leaders to survive, let alone thrive. So for you to speak to a leader that might be going through unbelievable amounts of pressure, numerous sleepless nights, maybe they are not necessarily hopeless, but they're getting close. What would you say to them? Where would you point them to say, hey, this is what you need to do right out of the gate if you're feeling completely burnt out and you don't know what else to do?
Yeah, it is so prevalent. And I don't know that people really understand that when you're running a business, you're leading a business, whether you own it or whether, it's completely your operation, it is stressful. It is very stressful. And I hear that a lot about the stress that leaders are going through. And the first thing I'd say is find people to talk to. And it's not likely going to be your friends and family because, you can probably talk, tell those people 90% of what's going through your mind, although, they may not understand. It's the 10% of those real challenges where you want to open up and kind of open up the kimono, if you will, and let people in so that you can get that real work done and that real support. I say, for me, Vistage does that for my members, right? To have a peer group, and whether it's Vistage or whether it's something else, I think for people who are really struggling, my message is you don't have to go it alone. There are people out there who are struggling as well, and struggling as a group and helping each other as a group makes a huge difference. So that isolation relief, and I see that in my members. I see that in the people and the other CEOs that I coach, of just having somebody to reach out, bounce ideas off of, and get that relief is what I'd say. Find where that is for you. Don't go it alone.
What do you say to people that say, I don't have time for mentorship, or I don't have time to even receive any kind of mentorship? What would you say to them?
I think my first question is, what are you saying yes to that you're saying no to yourself, right? And how much time are you spending worrying about things, not knowing that the decision that you're making is the right one, so you don't make it, not holding people accountable, spending time in meetings where you're not getting value from your organization. So what are you spending your time on that is more important than you spending time on your own development so that your company can grow and your people can thrive? And I haven't found a good answer to that.
I love that, though, because it's almost like a multiplying of time. It's an investment here so you could have a massive payoff. I always like to think if we just spend a little bit of time working in our business, if we spend and on our business, right? So we're working on it. We're trying to figure out what's working, what's not working. And we set aside time to do the things that you talked about, the fundamentals, right? Really diving into that, making sure they're set, the communication piece, the accountability piece, having that set, it's going to radically multiply the time in other areas. So it's almost like saying if they're not having time receiving the mentorship, they're going to miss out on a big way, all the mistakes that they could be making without having that mentorship. So I very much appreciate you mentioning that. What are some other things that you would say to leaders that are just extremely frustrated right now? So let's say they are receiving that mentorship you're talking about, but for whatever reason, just the stress is mounting. What's another thing that you would say to them that they should be focusing on?
Themselves. themselves, their self-care. I think that's one of the things that people forget about because they are so busy and they spend so much time putting out fires or trying to deal with people. I talked to somebody this morning, and in the conversation, it was the word frustration was probably used 15 times, right? And so for people like that who are who have all of this stress, they forget to take time for themselves and recharge. Because I think it's hard to lead a business when you're distracted and you're not focused. And to get that focus back, it takes reflection. It takes sitting back, looking at the business from, a high level perspective versus in the day perspective. But it's also taking that time to go recharge, taking a vacation, setting that example, quite honestly, because that's part of the cultures. How do you as a CEO set that example? And taking time away with the family and really setting aside the work and trying to get out of that space and doing something that they can really unplug from the work is critical, right? Because if you don't have that balance, if you don't take that time to do what is going to bring you joy, then it's not worth it, right? Then both sides of your life suffer.
Wow. I appreciate you mentioning that. I heard someone recently say something that was just horrifying to me. They were talking about just the sheer amount of CEOs that are not happy. They're just not happy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing to think about that, because if we're talking about culture and setting that example, imagine having a leader that they're not happy, they're burned out, they don't care as much as they could. That all goes back to what you're talking about, spending time focusing on themselves a little bit as well, taking that time to get away, to find rest so that they can be happy about what they're doing. They can find that passion, that purpose, that fulfillment again to really set the tone for culture.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I assess when I have one-on-ones with people and do coaching sessions and in our Vistage meetings is to ask people, where's your motivation level? And if it's not high, what's holding you back? What's getting in your way? Where have you lost that passion? But having a CEO assess their own motivation level is going to give a great deal of insight into uncovering the reasons why. And how can that turn around? Because you hit the nail on the head. As a leader, if you're unhappy, if you're stressed, that comes through to your organization. It comes through to your leadership team, and then they spread it to their leadership team. So being optimistic, even if there's stuff going on inside, which we talked about earlier, there's a lot of churn, inside being a CEO and all the things that they have on their plate. And you want to be transparent and vulnerable, but you want to make sure that you're giving an optimistic message, right? You want your team and your entire organization to know, hey, life is good. We're doing great as a company. We're going to continue to grow, get them excited. And that's where, having somebody else to talk to is really helpful so that it doesn't bleed in the organization.
I like that motivational level piece that you mentioned. So how does that look? So paint the scene for us. Is it a scale from 1 to 10? And if they're feeling a 3, they should be focused on something specific. But if they're at a 10, obviously that's good. How do you gauge that? Or what? Yeah. Is it just you're asking them the question, letting them sit with that? What's the best way that someone can implement that motivation level piece?
Yeah, I start with a 1 to 10. Like you said, 1 to 10 scale. We don't use 7s because 7s are a cop out. So I don't allow 7s in my group.
That's awesome.
I think that's the first thing, is having them assess where they are, and then having a dialogue about what's behind that. I never use the word should, and when my members use should, need to, have to, I always stop and say time out, because those are judgments, right? So we don't really go to that. I should be doing this. But we really try to uncover, well, what's behind the lack of motivation? And then, what can you do in order to kind of alleviate those reasons? And some of them are relatively easy. Some of them are not, and it's because it's hard. But if you can name it, if you can assess it and name it and start figuring out what's behind that, that's when you can address it. right? That's when action can happen.
So if something is quote unquote urgent that they should focus on, what do you recommend they do? They should what? They should focus on delegating so they could dive into that issue if there's a lack of motivation, or where should they go from there?
Yeah, it really depends on the situation, but in my role is to help them understand, help them explore what's holding them, what is decreasing their motivation, and then through good questioning is to have them come up with what's important to them. Because some people don't want to look where they might need to look, or might be helpful to look. But my job is to really help them determine. So I don't tell people, here's what you should do or anything. I really explore with them so that they can come up with what do they want to do and what are they willing to do to change their motivation, or change what is causing them stress, or change the things that are going wrong in their operation, because those are all tied.
I like that. I like that a lot. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. And
Yeah,
thank you for everything that you shared. I really appreciate your time today. I very much appreciate this conversation. There's a lot that I took out of it, but there's 3 things in particular that really stuck out to me. I really appreciate you mentioning the constant communication piece, but not only just saying it, doing it. You mentioned the company that has a 6-to-1 ratio, which is just astounding. Now, obviously, depending on business, if they could do that, but it just speaks, they're not only thinking outside the box, they're doing outside the box, really focusing on where is the constant communication with staff. That is having managers constantly communicating to their team. So I appreciate that. The second piece was on that accountability piece. I really appreciate what you mentioned regarding generations. I think there's a lot of CEOs that are flustered right now with all the different generations they may be dealing with. And I appreciate you mentioning that how people work is different, but that accountability piece is the same. People are people, humans are humans, right? So it really ties into, here's the accountability dependent on the behaviors that really lead and tie into that culture. So I appreciate you mentioning that. And then the third and final piece was, I really like that motivational level piece. Really having a gauge on a scale from 1 to 10, where are we? What's behind the lack of motivation? And if there is a drastic lack in motivation, we really need to ask ourselves, not only what's behind it, but is this setting the tone for where we want our culture to be? Because it really does tie into the leader on, are they happy? Are they motivated themselves to create that vibrant company culture? So I very much appreciate all of that, Lori. Thank you so much for your time. If people want to get more information on you, what you do, they want to learn more about Vistage, where's the best place they can go to get that information?
I think the best place for them to go is on LinkedIn. Just look me up on LinkedIn, send me a message, and I'm happy to have a conversation. And if I could, I want to say one last thing for your listeners.
Sure.
It's my parting words of advice is know thyself, know thy people, and develop both.
I love that. Thank you so much. I will include your LinkedIn so people could just click and connect with you there. But again, thank you so much for your time, Lori. I very much appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you for having me, Matt.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.